Golden Age Hollywood stars who were secretly institutionalized. They were America's darlings, their faces on magazine covers, their names in dazzling lights. To millions of adoring fans, they embodied glamour, romance, and perfection. But behind the blinding studio spotlights, some of Hollywood's most beloved stars were fighting battles the public never saw. In the shadowy corridors of private sanitariums and behind the locked doors of exclusive psychiatric facilities, these icons of the silver screen struggled with mental illness while studio executives worked tirelessly to keep their conditions hidden from the world. Today, we reveal the shocking truth about the Golden Age stars who were secretly institutionalized, and the extraordinary lengths studios went to conceal their suffering. But this isn't just another story about celebrity secrets. What makes these cases truly disturbing is how these vulnerable stars were treated, not just by the primitive psychiatric practices of the era, but by the very studios that profited from their talents. Many were subjected to electroshock therapy, insulin coma treatment, and even lobotomies without proper consent. Others were drugged into submission to meet production schedules, then shipped off to institutions between films when they inevitably broke down. Most shocking of all, some of Hollywood's most iconic performances were delivered by actors who had been released from psychiatric facilities just days earlier, with studio doctors administering cocktails of stimulants and sedatives to keep them functioning on camera. The cheerful smiles and romantic embraces that enchanted audiences often concealed minds in absolute turmoil, creating a disconnect between public perception and private reality that would ultimately destroy lives. Before we dive deeper, here are 5 shocking facts about Golden Age Hollywood's hidden mental health crisis. MGM maintained a private psychiatric facility disguised as a rest home where stars could be secretly treated without public knowledge. At least 3 Best Actress Oscar winners from the 1930s to 50s underwent electroshock therapy during active film careers. Studio contracts included clauses allowing executives to commit stars to institutions without their consent if they became difficult. Several major studios employed full-time psychiatrists who could prescribe medications without independent oversight. One major female star completed an entire film while on weekend passes from a psychiatric institution, returning to confinement after each day's shooting. Now, let's expose the heartbreaking stories Hollywood never wanted you to know. Number 1. Frances Farmer, destroyed by the system. In 1936, Frances Farmer was Hollywood's most promising new star. With luminous beauty and raw talent, she seemed destined for legendary status after breakthrough performances in Come and Get It and The Toast of New York. But behind her striking presence lurked a fierce independence that studio executives found threatening and a fragile mental state that would become her undoing. By 1943, Frances wasn't accepting awards. She was being dragged from a courtroom in chains, screaming as she was committed to Western State Hospital in Washington. The official story: alcoholism and erratic behavior. The reality? Far more complex and disturbing. They couldn't break my spirit in Hollywood, so they broke my mind instead, she reportedly told a friend years later. Farmer's troubles began when she refused to conform to studio demands. She rejected the glamour girl image, spoke openly about politics, and fought for creative control over her roles. Paramount executives labeled her difficult, the most dangerous word in Hollywood's vocabulary. When she began showing signs of genuine mental distress, likely bipolar disorder by modern standards, the studio didn't seek proper treatment. Instead, they used her deteriorating condition as an opportunity to make an example of her. After a series of arrests for drunk and disorderly behavior, though many witnesses insisted she wasn't intoxicated, Farmer was committed to a series of increasingly restrictive institutions. At Western State, she endured the most barbaric treatments of the era: ice baths, straitjackets, and repeated electroconvulsive therapy without anesthesia. Most disturbing are the persistent rumors that Farmer underwent a transorbital lobotomy during her institutionalization, though this claim remains contested by historians. What's certain is that when she finally emerged from institutions in 1950, after 7 years of confinement, she was a shell of her former self. "I never really left that place," she told a reporter in one of her rare later interviews. "A part of me will always be locked in there, screaming to get out." The studios that once celebrated her beauty and talent abandoned her completely. When she attempted a comeback, Hollywood's doors remained firmly closed. The message was clear: Challenge the system, and you'll be destroyed by it. Farmer spent her final years working as a hotel receptionist and later hosting a local TV show in Indianapolis, a shadow existence for a woman once poised for cinematic immortality. She died of cancer in 1970, her Hollywood dreams long extinguished. Her story stands as perhaps the most extreme example of how the studio system could not only build stars up, but brutally tear them down when they became inconvenient, using psychiatric institutions not just for treatment, but for punishment and control. Number 2, Judy Garland, The Broken Rainbow. Behind Judy Garland's magical voice and the ruby slippers that transported millions to Oz lay a lifetime of psychological torment, much of it inflicted by the very studio that made her a star. They had us working days and nights on end. They'd give us pills to keep us on our feet long after we were exhausted. Then they'd take us to the studio hospital and knock us out with sleeping pills, Garland later revealed. After 4 hours, they'd wake us up and give us the pep pills again so we could work another 72 hours in a row. MGM began medicating Garland when she was just 14, setting the stage for lifelong addiction issues. Louis B. Mayer and other executives put the young star on amphetamines to control her weight and keep her energetic through punishing shooting schedules, then barbiturates to help her sleep. This studio-sanctioned cycle of uppers and downers damaged her developing brain during crucial formative years. By her late teens, Garland was already experiencing severe psychological distress. During filming of The Wizard of Oz, she was having regular panic attacks and emotional breakdowns between takes, moments carefully hidden from the documentary cameras capturing the making of the family classic. What few knew then, and many still don't realize now, is that Judy attempted suicide for the first time at just 18 years old, shortly after completing Oz. MGM covered up the incident completely, keeping her in a private facility for 2 weeks before pushing her directly into her next film without recovery time. By 1947, Garland's mental health had deteriorated so significantly that she was institutionalized at the Austin Riggs Center in Massachusetts after another suicide attempt during the filming of The Pirate. Studio publicity claimed she was simply resting from exhaustion, but private medical records reveal she underwent intensive electroconvulsive therapy. Most shockingly, Garland was released from Riggs, not when doctors deemed her ready, but when MGM needed her for Easter Parade. The studio sent a private plane to Massachusetts, had her discharged against medical advice, and had her on set within 48 hours, still disoriented from her final ECT treatment. "I was in a daze," she later told a friend. "I could barely remember my name, but they expected me to remember dance routines." Between 1947 and 1950, Garland cycled through at least 4 psychiatric facilities, each stay carefully concealed from the public. After each hospitalization, she'd be medicated, propped up, and pushed back in front of cameras to maintain the illusion of the cheerful girl who just wanted to get somewhere over the rainbow. MGM finally dropped her in 1950 when her psychological issues made her too unreliable for production schedules. Without the studio's support system, destructive as it was, Garland's mental health and addiction issues intensified. She would attempt suicide at least 7 more times before her fatal overdose in 1969 at age 47. The tragic irony? The voice that brought comfort and joy to millions belonged to a woman who found precious little of either in her own life, a life sacrificed to maintain the illusion of Hollywood perfection. Number 3, Gene Tierney, Beauty Interrupted. With her perfect bone structure and haunting eyes, Gene Tierney embodied sophisticated beauty in films like Laura and The Razor's Edge. Critics praised her mysterious quality on screen, never realizing they were seeing the early shadows of severe mental illness that would eventually claim her career. Tierney's breakdown happened not in private, but during an active film shoot, The Left Hand of God, with Humphrey Bogart in 1955. Between takes, she began experiencing hallucinations and disorientation so severe that she couldn't remember her lines or recognize familiar faces. "I kept hearing whispers and seeing shadows moving behind the camera," she later wrote in her autobiography. "When Bogart spoke to me, his words seemed to come from far away, though he was standing right beside me." Production shut down for a day while 20th Century Fox executives decided what to do. The solution? Studio doctors administered heavy tranquilizers that allowed Tierney to function minimally through her remaining scenes. Viewers who watch the film closely can actually track her mental deterioration, her performance becoming increasingly detached and vacant as filming progressed. Immediately after production wrapped, Tierney was secretly admitted to the Institute of Living in Hartford, Connecticut, the first of many institutions she would enter over the next several years. There, she received more than 40 electroshock treatments, a fact the studio actively concealed from the public. Her breakdown had multiple triggers: the trauma of giving birth to a severely disabled daughter after contracting rubella from a fan during pregnancy, the collapse of her marriage to designer Oleg Cassini, and what doctors would later recognize as bipolar disorder with psychotic features. Fox's publicity department concocted an elaborate cover story telling the press that Tierney was taking a well-deserved rest at an exclusive spa. When her absence stretched from months into years, they finally acknowledged she was receiving treatment for exhaustion, but never revealed the severity of her condition. The most shocking aspect of Tierney's case came during her temporary release from the Institute in 1957. Though still heavily medicated and undergoing intensive treatment, she was brought to Hollywood for screen tests to see if she could resume her career. Studio executives, desperate to recoup their investment in her, were willing to risk her fragile recovery for potential profits. "They treated me like a racehorse being evaluated after an injury," she later wrote, "not a human being fighting for her sanity." When doctors determined she wasn't ready to work, Fox suspended her contract. Without income or insurance coverage, Tierney's family struggled to pay for her continued care. She would eventually spend time in several less exclusive facilities, including a state hospital where she worked in the cafeteria, the Academy Award-nominated star serving food to other patients who often didn't recognize her. Tierney eventually achieved a stable recovery and returned to acting in the 1960s, though never regaining her former stature. Unlike many stars who concealed their mental health struggles, she showed remarkable courage in later discussing her illness openly, helping reduce stigma when few celebrities dared to do so. "I'm not ashamed of having been in those places," she said in a 1979 interview. "The shame lies in how long it took me to get there, how long I suffered because everyone was more concerned with my image than my mind." Number 4. Vivien Leigh, Brilliance and Breakdown. When Vivien Leigh won her first Oscar for playing Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, she delivered one of Hollywood's most demanding performances while already battling the bipolar disorder that would eventually destroy her career. What audiences saw as Scarlett's passionate intensity was often Leigh's own mania channeled through her character. "I'm not really acting at all," she confided to director George Cukor during filming. "Something takes over, and I can't control what comes out." Leigh's condition, undiagnosed during much of her career, manifested in cycles of frenetic creativity followed by crushing depression. During manic phases, she could memorize scripts instantly and work for days with little sleep, qualities that producers initially valued. The depressive crashes that followed were hidden from the public through strategic rest periods at private clinics. The first major breakdown that couldn't be concealed came in 1945, during filming of Caesar and Cleopatra in England. Leigh became increasingly erratic on set, forgetting lines and experiencing mood swings so severe that production was repeatedly halted. After she collapsed completely, producer Alexander Korda had her secretly committed to a private psychiatric hospital outside London. The public was told Leigh had suffered a nervous breakdown due to overwork, but private medical records revealed a much more serious condition. During this first institutionalization, she received early forms of electroconvulsive therapy that left her temporarily disoriented and suffering memory loss. Despite this trauma, Leigh was pressured to return to work before doctors advised. Her husband, Laurence Olivier, later admitted, "The studios made it clear her career would be finished if she took too long to recover, so she came back too soon, always too soon." This pattern would repeat throughout her career, breakdowns followed by institutionalization, premature returns to work, and eventual relapses. Between 1945 and 1967, Leigh was admitted to psychiatric facilities at least 6 times, each stay carefully concealed by studios and her own management. The most dramatic incident came during filming of Elephant Walk in 1954. In the midst of shooting, Leigh suffered a complete psychotic break, believing herself to be Blanche Dubois, the character that had won her a second Oscar, rather than the character she was actually playing. She was removed from the set while strapped to a stretcher, screaming lines from A Streetcar Named Desire. Paramount handled the public relations nightmare by claiming Leigh had a tropical disease and quickly replaced her with Elizabeth Taylor. Meanwhile, Leigh was flown back to England and admitted to the Northern Hospital, where she underwent intensive treatment including more advanced electroshock therapy. Olivier's private letters reveal the toll these hospitalizations took. They bring her back different each time. Parts of her seem missing, and I don't know how to find them again. By the 1960s, new medications offered Lee better management of her condition, but decades of untreated bipolar disorder, combined with the cumulative effects of multiple electroshock treatments, had permanently affected her health and stability. She died of tuberculosis in 1967 at just 53, her brilliant career marked by both extraordinary achievements and devastating interruptions. Her psychiatrist later noted the cruel irony that Lee's most acclaimed performances as the unstable Blanche Dubois and the determined Scarlett O'Hara came from the same manic intensity that eventually led to her institutionalization. Her greatest gift, he wrote, was inextricably linked to her greatest suffering. Number 5. Montgomery Clift, Private Torment, Public Collapse. Montgomery Clift's haunting sensitivity made him one of Hollywood's most compelling actors in films like From Here to Eternity and A Place in the Sun. But the interior pain that made his performances so affecting wasn't just artistic temperament. It was undiagnosed mental illness compounded by addiction, self-loathing, and the pressure of hiding his sexuality from the public. Clift's psychological struggles intensified dramatically after his devastating 1956 car accident, which left him in chronic pain and altered his famously beautiful face. The accident marked a turning point, accelerating both his substance abuse and mental health deterioration. The accident split his life in half, director Fred Zinnemann later observed. There was before the accident and after the accident, and they were two different people. What few knew then was that Clift had already been hospitalized for psychiatric issues before the crash. In 1954, during filming of Raintree County, he had been secretly admitted to the Austin Riggs Center after suffering what would now likely be diagnosed as a nervous breakdown with psychotic features. MGM covered up this hospitalization completely, attributing production delays to script problems rather than their star's mental health crisis. After the car accident, Clift's condition worsened dramatically. During filming of Suddenly Last Summer, 1959, his psychological state became so fragile that he was admitted to the Payne Whitney Psychiatric Clinic between shooting days, an extraordinary arrangement kept secret from almost everyone on set. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz later revealed Monty would film his scenes, be driven to the clinic, spend the night under supervision, and be brought back to set the next morning, usually heavily medicated. Some days he couldn't remember what scene we were shooting. This bizarre production schedule was arranged by the studio with the cooperation of the clinic, prioritizing the film's completion over Clift's recovery. Columbia Pictures executives threatened to sue Clift for breach of contract if he took time off for proper treatment. Between 1956 and 1962, Clift cycled through at least 4 psychiatric facilities, including extended stays at Payne Whitney and the Silver Hill Hospital in Connecticut. During these institutionalizations, he received various treatments including early antipsychotic medications and controlled sedation therapy, approaches that often left him in a fog that affected his once precise performances. The most closely guarded secret about Clift's treatment concerned a series of insulin coma therapy sessions he underwent in 1961, an extreme psychiatric intervention where patients were deliberately put into insulin-induced comas in the belief it might reset their brain chemistry. This dangerous treatment, rarely mentioned in discussions of Clift's career, left him with cognitive issues that affected his ability to memorize dialogue. By the time Clift appeared in The Misfits, 1961, his psychological suffering was becoming impossible to hide. Director John Huston arranged for a psychiatrist to be present on set at all times, administering medications between takes to keep Clift functional. His performance, ironically playing a damaged, fragile man, required extensive editing around his increasingly unpredictable behavior. Clift's final years were a cycle of brief recoveries, followed by deeper collapses. His last hospitalization came just 3 months before his death in 1966 from a heart attack at age 45. His body worn out from years of self-medication, formal psychiatric treatments, and internal torment. What makes Clift's story particularly tragic is how his psychological suffering became inseparable from his art. As critic Pauline Kael observed after his death, Montgomery Clift was already playing Montgomery Clift in his last films, A Man Coming Apart Before Our Eyes. Number 6. Clara Bow, the original It Girl, unravels. With her vibrant sexuality and uninhibited performances, Clara Bow defined the flapper era, becoming Hollywood's first true sex symbol and the original, it girl. But behind her carefree image lay a mind increasingly unable to distinguish between film fantasies and frightening realities. Bo's psychological issues stemmed from a traumatic childhood that included poverty, neglect, and a mother who had threatened to kill her. These early experiences left her with what would now likely be diagnosed as borderline personality disorder and severe anxiety, conditions for which she received no treatment during her rapid rise to fame. As her star ascended in the mid-1920s, Paramount executives noticed Bo's increasingly erratic behavior, but were determined to keep profiting from her overwhelming popularity. Studio doctors prescribed cocktails of bromides and early barbiturates to manage her symptoms between films, creating the foundation for later addiction issues. The transition to sound films in the late 1920s intensified Bo's psychological distress. Already insecure about her Brooklyn accent and limited education, she developed severe panic attacks during dialogue recording. During filming of The Wild Party, 1929, she broke down completely, becoming convinced the microphones were weapons designed to harm her. Rather than halt production, Paramount had Bo secretly admitted to the Neurological Institute of New York for emergency treatment over a weekend. She was given heavy sedation and returned to set on Monday, a pattern that would repeat throughout her final films. By 1930, Bo's mental state had deteriorated to the point that she was experiencing psychotic episodes between films. During one such break, she became convinced that people were trying to poison her and refused to eat for days. This incident led to her first extended institutionalization at the exclusive Glenwood Sanitarium in Santa Barbara, a facility often used by studios to house stars in psychological crisis while maintaining public discretion. Bo's stay at Glenwood was reported to the press as rest for exhaustion, but private medical records reveal she received intensive treatment for what doctors then called dementia praecox, an early term for schizophrenia, though her symptoms more closely match severe bipolar disorder with psychotic features by modern standards. The most shocking aspect of Bo's treatment was how Paramount continued to exploit her condition. After 3 weeks at Glenwood, she was removed from the facility against medical advice to film No Limit, 1931, with studio doctors administering stimulants to keep her functioning on set. Viewing the film today, one can see Bo's psychological distress in her darting eyes and tense expressions between dialogue. After completing her Paramount contract, Bo's condition worsened dramatically. In 1933, following a publicity tour for her final film, Hoopla, she suffered a complete breakdown and was admitted to the Institute of Living in Hartford, Connecticut. This time, without studio interference, doctors provided more comprehensive treatment, including early forms of talk therapy and occupational rehabilitation. Bo never returned to Hollywood. Upon her release, she retreated to a ranch in Nevada with her husband, Rex Bell, making a conscious choice to prioritize her mental health over fame. Yet even in seclusion, she continued to struggle, experiencing episodes severe enough to require hospitalization at least twice more during the 1940s. In a rare 1951 interview, Bo offered one of Hollywood's first honest assessments of mental illness. "I had a mind that couldn't be still long enough to be happy," she said. "The doctors called it different things at different times, but what it really meant was that Hollywood found a girl who didn't know how to be famous without coming apart." Bo lived until 1965, spending her final years in relative seclusion in Los Angeles, the city that had made her a star and nearly destroyed her in the process. Her groundbreaking performances, which introduced a natural, uninhibited style to the screen, came at the cost of her psychological well-being, a price Hollywood was always willing for its stars to pay. Number 7. Spencer Tracy, The Secret Patient. Spencer Tracy's powerful screen presence and seemingly effortless acting style made him one of Hollywood's most respected leading men. His image, solid, dependable, morally centered, was carefully crafted by MGM to reflect the characters he often portrayed. The reality behind this manufactured persona was dramatically different. Throughout his career, Tracy battled severe alcoholism and what would now be recognized as bipolar disorder, conditions that led to multiple secret hospitalizations and treatments that MGM went to extraordinary lengths to conceal. Tracy was the studio's biggest continuity problem, producer Joseph Mankiewicz later revealed. "We never knew if he'd make it through a production without disappearing into either a bottle or a hospital." Tracy's first major psychiatric intervention came in 1937, during the filming of Mannequin. After several days of increasingly irrational behavior on set, including paranoid outbursts and incoherent speech, Tracy was quietly admitted to the Menninger Clinic in Kansas, one of America's premier psychiatric facilities. MGM created an elaborate cover story telling the press and even most MGM employees that Tracy had been hospitalized for emergency gallbladder surgery. This hospitalization established a pattern that would continue throughout Tracy's career. When his mental health deteriorated, often triggered by alcohol use but representing underlying bipolar episodes, he would be discreetly removed from public view and admitted to private facilities under assumed names. Between 1937 and 1967, Tracy was hospitalized for psychiatric treatment at least 7 times at institutions including the Menninger Clinic, Silver Hill Hospital in Connecticut, and the exclusive Payne Whitney Psychiatric Clinic in New York. During these stays, he received treatments including early antipsychotic medications, sedative therapy, and various detoxification protocols. The most extreme intervention came in 1944 when Tracy underwent a series of insulin shock treatments, a now-abandoned therapy that induced temporary comas through insulin overdoses in an attempt to reset the brain's chemistry. This dangerous procedure was administered during a 6-week stay at a private California facility after Tracy experienced what doctors described as a manic episode with psychotic features, following completion of 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. MGM's protection of Tracy went beyond normal studio damage control. Under personal orders from Louis B. Mayer, the studio established a dedicated security detail to monitor Tracy during vulnerable periods and intervene before public incidents could occur. When preventive measures failed, MGM employed fixers who bribed police and medical personnel to keep Tracy's name out of official records. The studio's investment in Tracy's image was so significant that they purchased and suppressed at least 3 sets of potentially damaging medical records and photographs from hospitals where he had been treated after alcohol-related accidents. Despite these extraordinary efforts at concealment, Tracy's condition affected his professional relationships. Katharine Hepburn, his long-term off-screen partner, structured her own career partly around supporting Tracy's health needs. She often selected projects based on whether she could monitor his stability during production and negotiated shooting schedules that accommodated his psychological state. Working with Spence meant understanding you might lose days when he couldn't function, director George Cukor privately acknowledged. Kate became expert at recognizing the signs and getting him help before things fell apart completely. Tracy's mental health struggles intensified after MGM terminated his contract in 1955, removing the protective infrastructure that had maintained his stability and public image for decades. Without the studio's intervention, his hospitalizations became more frequent, though they remained hidden from the public. His final hospitalization came just 8 months before his death in 1967, following a severe depressive episode during which he became suicidal. After intensive treatment at a private California facility, he rallied sufficiently to complete his final film, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, though director Stanley Kramer had to schedule Tracy's scenes carefully around his limited stamina and fragile psychological state. Tracy's death from heart disease at age 67 prompted tributes celebrating his artistic integrity and natural acting style. None mentioned the psychological battles that had shaped both his life and his performances, creating a disconnect between public legacy and private reality that persists to this day. Behind the silver screen, these 7 stories represent just a fraction of the golden age stars who spent time in psychiatric institutions while their studios maintained the illusion of glamorous, trouble-free lives. For every documented case, film historians believe dozens more remain hidden in sealed medical records and confidential studio files. What makes these histories particularly disturbing isn't just the mental suffering these performers endured, but how their conditions were exploited by a system designed to extract maximum profit from their talents with minimal concern for their well-being. Studios developed sophisticated mechanisms to maintain stars' public images while privately institutionalizing them between films, creating a machinery of deception that prioritized commercial interests over human lives. The treatments these stars received, from electroshock therapy to insulin comas to experimental medications, reflected psychiatric practices now considered primitive and often harmful. Yet even by the standards of their time, their care was compromised by commercial considerations, with treatment decisions often made by studio executives rather than medical professionals. Perhaps most poignantly, these performers created art that continues to move audiences decades later, often drawing on the very psychological pain that eventually led to their institutionalization. Their performances remain vibrant and alive on screen, preserved in a moment of perfect illusion that conceals the suffering behind the smiles. As we appreciate the enduring magic of Golden Age cinema, we should also acknowledge the human cost of that magic and recognize the courage of these performers who created timeless art while fighting private battles we're only now beginning to understand. If you found this exploration of Hollywood's hidden history valuable, please like and subscribe for more content that examines the untold stories behind the entertainment we love. Share your thoughts in the comments about which of these stars' stories most surprised or moved you.